The southeast of England is suffering a drought, and that is official, the government announced today as ministers met water companies, farmers and environmental groups for an emergency summit. With swathes of eastern England already affected, water firms have warned customers can expect restrictions like hosepipe bans this summer unless there is significant amounts of rain. As Darcy Sony reports.
A stony bed where there should be water. Drought Reservoir in the Midlands is running dry. You can see by the watermarks on that tower how much this reservoir should normally have. But the last 16 months have been the driest since records began here in the Midlands. Drought serves 100,000 people locally, and some are already feeling the effects. Just minutes old, lambing season has come early on Foxholes Farm near Stratford. But if the rains don't fall, the grass they depend on for grazing could dry out. Jim Meadows has been farming in the area for 45 years, but says this is the driest he's seen for nearly 3 decades. So are you worried what will happen if the rains don't come?
Very much so. I mean, last year we had a very similar situation, but we did get some rain in May. But before that, we had crops that we planted into just dry seed beds that virtually halved the yield.
So it could affect your livelihood?
It will do, yes.
The last drought to have swept the country saw standpipes in the street and people having to queue for water. Keen to avoid the spectre of 1976, today the Environment Secretary hosted an emergency summit.
Unless we have significant rainfall over the next couple of months, we are going to be facing very dry conditions with an impact on farming again and on horticulture, but also quite probably on the public water supply.
Huge swathes of the east are already in a state of drought and have been since last summer. Today the southeast of England joined that list. And Shropshire, Nottinghamshire and the Midlands, along with the rest of Norfolk, are also officially at risk of drought.
This is a Beal water in Kent.
This reservoir is 60% empty, yet areas in the north haven't suffered any shortages. On the agenda of today's summit, how separate water companies can better work together. The UK hasn't had a national water plan since privatisation, when regional suppliers were formed. Severn Trent is now looking at how it can work with neighbouring Anglia.
It's a scheme that involves taking water out the ground in Birmingham, putting it in the River Tame, that flows into the River Trent, and then allowing that water to flow 80 miles down the river over the borders into the Anglian region.
Some companies have applied for permits from the Environment Agency to extract more water from rivers. This pipe takes water from the River Lem 10 miles away, but some argue that strategy is unsustainable.
We still have water licences that mean that companies can continue to take water even when we know that environment is suffering, and about 1/3 of the water that's taken is wasted.
Water companies argue they have improved their record on leakages, but in the future we may all have to rethink the way we use this resource that we can no longer take for granted. Darshna Soni, Channel 4 News at Drought Reservoir.
So it's a brick in the cistern and showers and not baths as of tonight. And the main news, David Cameron has insisted he'll push ahead with his NHS reforms after angry protesters heckled the Health Secretary outside Downing Street's talks on the future of the health service.
Don't forget, there is a full weather forecast to follow with Liam Dutton.
We're back tomorrow, 7 o'clock. Until then, from Sarah and from me, that's Channel 4 News. Good evening.
Good night.
Good evening. Well, after a fairly chilly weekend across the UK, it's all changed for the week ahead. It's set to be cloudy and breezy, but importantly, it's set to turn quite mild, fairly spring-like in fact. For the second half of the week, we could see highs of 16 or 17 degrees. Now, here's the reason for the mild weather. The wind coming all the way from the Azores, bringing with it that warm air, and it's set to stay with us for much of the upcoming week. Now, for this evening and overnight, it's a fairly quiet story across the UK. Some clearer spells for eastern parts of England and Scotland. Further westwards, though, always a little bit more cloud. There'll be a few spots of rain, the odd heavier burst across the hills and mountains, breezy too. But for most of us, a mild story, generally around 5 to 8 degrees. So tomorrow morning, there's a definite divide in the weather. It'll stay that way for much of the day. Bright skies, even sunshine for eastern parts of Scotland and England. Further westwards, though, for much of the day, there'll be a lot of clouds and hill fog and also occasional rain. Here's the picture then for 3 o'clock in the afternoon. A definite divide across Scotland. Towards the west, it's windy and damp and cloudy with outbreaks of rain, but some sunshine further eastwards for Aberdeenshire, Lothian and Fife. And that's the way it'll go for northern parts of England too. Damp on the western side of the Pennines, brighter skies further east, and a mild story across the board, highs of 11 or 12 degrees. Now for Wednesday, it's set to be quite a windy day, a gale force wind around exposed coasts, and a band of heavy rain initially across Scotland into Northern Ireland will reach into England and Wales by the end of the day, but still mild at 12 or 13 degrees. Don't forget, more on the website at channel4.com/weather, and you can, of course, always join me on Twitter. That's it from me. Take care. Goodbye.